One warship of flesh and blood opened a breathing fire, burning the nothingness with impotent rage. Sirens blaring across foreign territory, generals screaming in a panic. The deluge had been unanticipated. Now, whole battalions gasped under the explosive storm, fear cutting through every protection. All changed. War raged. Panic coursed through the alien armadas the instant sensors noticed the human warship's weapons release. For years past, various factions fought battle after battle across this contested region, each fighting for resources and position. Skirmishes and cross-border raids had become a daily occurrence, but they had never encountered anything like this. The sudden intrusion of a human vehicle, a vessel, singular and individual, broke every assumption made about Earth's possibilities. Every command center at the aliens' disposal was calling for real-time feeds. They had to witness for themselves how a single warship could upend battles that had traditionally required entire fleets. Their screens lit up with data collated by scouts in the hinterlands. Weapons technology beyond anything one would find on a standard map, shields that flinched at energy patterns recognized as pedestrian, and engines that had outstripped a normal capital ship. Every new line of intelligence stirred disbelief. Humanity, previously dismissed as a background player, now had unstoppable power. The command staff scrambled to adjust. Fleets, already mired in local squabbles, suspended their attacks in midair to confront the larger menace. War councils met through hasty hololinks, creating uncomfortable bedfellows. Old grudges faded before the threat of a human incursion. If they kept fighting small-scale wars, the unstoppable warboat would pick them off one by one. Surprised, the region's strongest militaries found they had badly underestimated Earth's strategic jump. It wasn't long before the faction leaders were staring at hollow displays that told a single brutal truth. Whole lines of defense fell before the human vessel's opening salvos. Regional observers attempted to follow the craft's movements. Some data indicated it had moved at improbable velocities, changing course unpredictably. Others described sophisticated jamming that blotted out scanners at critical points. No matter how they attempted, they couldn't nail down a pattern. This uncertainty also had the generals racked with dread. Their fear had taken on a physical form, with battered vessels escaping initial skirmishes reporting unstoppable beams of energy. Crews described rail shots that drove directly through thick hull plating on one brutal shot. Missiles fired by the defenders had their trajectories scrambled or were neutralized in mid-flight. Survivors maintained that the warship's pilot picked them apart like an open book, hitting right where they were most vulnerable. The generals who thought themselves seasoned from centuries of battle experience felt their confidence erode with every new distress signal. Calls for reinforcement followed in a wave. Fleets depleted called back patrols from distant corners, gathering a Leviathan armada in the war-torn center. No one species could stand against this onslaught alone, so once rival predators began to cooperate out of sheer survival instinct. As they rushed, snippets of the warship's abilities seeped through. Shields with outputs beyond normal measure, a reactor signature in line with next-generation tech. Some conspirators murmured that humans must have uncovered lost relics or purloined advanced designs from bygone empires. Because there was no time to verify rumors, the generals had to err on the side of caution. Throughout savage star systems, the frontline troops were witness to the work of the unstoppable. Space lanes once vibrant with the fleets of war, now choked with the wreckage of the burning. The human craft stalked like a predator, picking key targets and belting them in quick, savage engagements. The generals realized it wasn't random. The warship was following a strategic ground plan, which had crippled logistics lines and command nodes. Every destroyed outpost left whole sectors without supplies or backups. Local populations panicked. Civilians, accustomed to constant battles, had to contend with another terror that was unstoppable and overshadowed everything before. Rumors of surrender started to appear, but the generals were reluctant. They had wanted to try at least one coordinated strike with their combined fleets. If they could pin down the unkillable, perhaps they could drown it in so much fire it would crack even the strongest shield. Preparations soared. Factories belched out last batch of high-end torpedoes. Planetary cannons twisted to cover the predicted avenues of attack. Yet the predictable wouldn't obey any predictable course. Instead, it exploited gaps in sensor coverage, weaving between fronts. With every passing hour, more transmissions arrived. Whole cruisers hollowed out, fortresses silenced, unstoppable blasts besmirching planetary rings. Alien generals found themselves perpetually a move behind. Their tightly scripted lines fell apart. The feeling of doom permeated from elite strategists to rank-and-file soldiers. It was widely acknowledged that if the Unstoppable chose to attack their system next, it had no fail-safe defense against it. This one ship had completely overturned the dynamics of the entire war. Factions that had merely wanted to defeat one another suddenly labored to create a universal front. Still, a hushed reality underlay all the briefings, that perhaps no force, no matter how great, could compete with a vessel that made entire fleets useless in minutes. Fear and desperation forced them to keep trying. They could only gird for an inevitable onslaught and await some miracle that might save them from our unrelenting storm. Inside the raw-formed hull of the human warship, tension and determination mingled. The crew knew this ship was not just a war machine. It was nothing less than Earth's last gamble. For decades, humanity suffered relentless alien oppression, trade embargoes, stealth raids, forced concessions. In the end, Earth's leaders realized that obeying the galaxy's rules got them nowhere. They required a trump card so daunting that no empire would dare to cross them again. That trump card was this warship. Constructed in covert shipyards above a concealed colony, it absorbed lessons learned from countless skirmishes. Engineers developed layered shielding that cycled frequencies in microseconds, defeating normal beam locks. The primary rail cannon was a new electromagnetic coil design that accelerated slugs at terrifying speed. Combined with stealthy features to avoid detection by scanning, the warship behaved like an apex predator stalking through a sea of unsuspecting prey. Behind these cutting-edge systems was the crew's steely determination. Picked from Earth's finest, each soldier had personal stakes in the fight. Some were missing families to alien invasions on the frontier. Others participated in skirmishes, getting an idea of how outmanned Earth's conventional fleets were. And so now, as they commanded the invincible warship's consoles, they felt a consuming desire to protect humankind's future, assuring Earth's supremacy through tireless strength. The warship's current mission was both straightforward and severe, in the cycle of perpetual conflict that menaced Earth's outer colonies. As enemy alien factions hammered one another in a brutal multi-front war, Earth's world got clobbered in collateral damage. Peace treaties hardly ever took small human settlements into account. Or rather, this relentless method. It was Earth's declaration that it would not be ignored again. If the only language of the world was unstoppable force, then humanity would learn it. A hush of discipline reigned throughout the corridors of the warship. Crew members paid close attention to the kill logs. With each new victory, their conviction solidified. But they also bore the burden of unleashing catastrophic violence. Some hoped quietly that the unstoppable display would provide inducement for a quick surrender. Still others held that no one act could pacify the region's fractious powers. They pressed on nonetheless, penetrating further into enemy territory. Conference rooms, officers debated who to hit next. The war zone was immense, dotted with bastions. Knocking them all out will be time-consuming, but selecting just one capital may be insufficient. The best way to handle the unstoppable? Keep them guessing, pluck several nerve centers in quick succession, and disappear before any super coalition could coalesce. The crew noted the danger that any slip could leave them pinned down by superior numbers. No matter how invulnerable their warship seemed, enough converging fire might threaten. Confidence tempered caution. Underneath that tension, a common pride connected them. However sophisticated alien civilizations might boast of being, Earth had out-engineered them all, creating unstoppable engines of war. Every strike validated the warship's design and the crew's skill. Some of them thought they were bringing about a new chapter in human history, when Earth would no longer tremble in its boots and dictate the politics of the stars. Released from second-class status, they could arrange for better trade routes to be protected, safeguard colonies, and, at long last, expect fair treatment. As Warship closed in on the next cluster of battered fleets, final checkups began. But it did so well that even at maximum range with specialized rail slugs loaded by gunnery officers, it was virtually impossible to stop. Technicians on the shield cycled frequency buffers. The next target, if intelligence was to be trusted, had its own formidable capital ships from several species, historically in a standoff. Now, those ships appear to have combined forces in a blockade. The Indomitable were set to break that blockade, showing the galaxy more than ever that mankind was not some petty power. The navigation display lines glowed with possible points of confrontation. The pilot of the warship sped up. Engines thrummed at pitches that rattled lesser craft apart. Each crew stationed red-green. Humanity's only hope flew forward, unimpeded in its mission. The galaxy's might had delayed too long its attention to Earth. This warship's inexorable assault would also ensure that no empire made that mistake again. An allied cordon of historic size covered the access bay to an important base. Dozens of capital ships from a variety of species came together in a tight formation, creating a semicircle of fiery wrath filled to the brim with cannons and missile pods. The warship was, of course, unstoppable, arriving out of hyperspace just outside of sensor range, shielded by a vortex of cosmic dust. Observers on the blockade's flagship detected weak anomalies, but nothing was visible on standard scans. Then, without a moment's notice, the unimaginable rushed into view, blurring past the blockade's own perimeter at astonishing speed. The Allied defenders fired instantly. Salvos of torpedoes, high-energy beams, and ballistic shells overwhelmed, creating a lethal weave of destruction. They lit up the starfield in flashes. For a moment, it seemed impossible that anything could outlive such volume. But the Unstoppable's force field flared to prismatic life, bending the barrage with almost labored ease. The shield buckled barely or flinched, a shudder of despair rippling through the defenders. The indomitable warship struck back. Rail cannons erupted in choreographed fury, every slug fired with surgical precision. Whole ranks of frigates disappeared in swelling detonations. The propellers of a battleship, long and heavy, designed to rotate heavy turrets, but the Unstoppable hammered it, leaving the battleship to drift, helpless. Local frequencies were cloaked in panic. Crews shouted conflicting commands. Some demanded to reform behind heavier vessels. Others scurried ahead, eager to flank the inevitable. They did capitalize on every gap, pouring unstoppable fire. At the blockade's center, an alien admiral quickly deduced that their neat formation had turned into a liability. The unrestrainable vessel wove in and out of their formation, compelling them to hold their fire with their colossal crossfire lest they hit one another. Meanwhile, unquenchable rays shot out in every direction, methodically sapping the strength of the defenders. The largest capital ships staggered one and then another, atmosphere venting or reactor meltdowns roaring. In a futile attempt to suppress the inexorable, a group of sophisticated carriers launched swarms of strike fighters. Swarms of small craft zipped in, filling space with micromissiles and disruptor beams. For an instant, the Indomitable's barrier stuttered as hundreds of impacts landed at the same time. On the command channels of the blockade, hope flared that perhaps sheer numbers could pierce the unmovable. Then it activated a suite of rotating point defense turrets that sliced through entire squadrons in seconds. The mangled remains spun off, blackened and somber. An allied dreadnought fired a doomsday cannon, an experimental weapon said to vaporize entire cruisers in one blow. The unmovable responded by flat-out accelerating, the beam slicing across empty space. Then, with momentum, it returned a focused volley at the dreadnought's vulnerable side. Blast after blast plagued the dreadnought's interior until a single explosive overwhelmed its hull, eviscerating its life in one furious conflagration. Defenders knew their finest weapon had failed to hit. A moment of reckoning came when the unbeatable landed a death blow on the blockade's lead vessel. Rail slugs punched through interlocking armor, sending indescribable explosions inside. The bridge of the flagship shattered, command and control in tatters. Fleets lost their way. Discipline unraveled in real time. Survivors fled blindly in a panic or attempted futile last-ditch ramming attempts. The Unstoppable passed or vaporized all. So Allied generals, watching the meltdown from auxiliary ships, knew defeat when they saw it and knew that there was no stopping it. Their ranks were unraveled, redoubts practically ajar. Transmission after transmission broadcast pleas for any reinforcement, but none could be mobilized in time. The plucky craft burrowed deeper, bystanders parting shots batting off of its shield. In moments, the blockade, months in the making, was scattered wreckage. And when the noise subsided, the unshrinking ran through the wreckage, searching for more danger. Thrashed ships hesitated to re-engage. Fleeing at maximum speed, crews signaled surrender. It was the only advanced, notable still. Far across the war zone, watchers knew that humanity's champion had broken through the first big wall of resistance. The momentum now was all on Earth's side. Alien generals who had previously bragged about their invincible armadas watched helplessly as one unstoppable warship undid those very fleets. The new era was here, imposed by irrevocable force. As the unmatched craft pressed on, alien generals called an emergency summit in the sector's largest citadel. They battered leadership, realized none of their usual tactics were working. The massive blockade they'd laid for hours fell apart. They required one last, audacious gambit or faced complete subjugation. Frantic debates resulted in a single, risky plot: draw the unstoppable into a fortified arsenal outfitted with secret superweapons. If it went for the ruse, perhaps the monolithic could be overrun or at last somehow confined. In whispering galleries, they configured the grid marked as the warship's killing zone, a vacant star lane choked with stealth mines and gravimetric distorters. Once the implacable was detected, high-power beam satellites orbiting behind planetoids would triangulate. Then the local star's swirling anomalies could function as an impromptu meltdown device if nothing else worked. The generals invested all resources available to strengthen this killing ground. They revived archaic models rumored to be too dangerous for normal use. They had to stop Earth's unstoppable champion at all costs before it hit the core of the Empire. Adjacent fleets of allies fought token battles with the unstoppable, all designed to nudge it ever closer to our kill zone. They pretended to fall back under enemy attack, parting the way for the unstoppable a straight tunnel. Observing from these few scattered vantage points, the warship's crew likely observed patterns in these half-hearted defenses, but time had not been on their side, either. The undeterred steamed ahead, reading each new line of defenders and shredding or sidestepping them with little fuss. Inside the trap system, engineers worked around the clock to complete gravitational net arrays. If they were able to engage at the right moment, the unstoppable could be pinned in place long enough for the superweapons to saturate its shield. Again and again, generals recounted their plan: unite every advanced platform in one synchronized flurry. If that didn't work, they'd think about igniting the local star's core, burning themselves out but annihilating the infallible. That final measure was unthinkably drastic, but fear trumped caution. The next moves of the unstoppable were swift. Crippling strikes roiled more allied strongholds, each completed in a matter of hours. Warships that used to terrorize entire star clusters lay less than gutshot. The immutable warships surged forth, impervious still, leaving drifting husks in its wake. The generals knew that the unstoppable was indeed going in the direction of their trap system, perhaps suspecting that their system has a grand strategic zero there. Their desperate scheme would soon be put to the test. Some staff members questioned the ethics of inflicting star-class destruction. If the meltdown spread in ways that were not predictable, billions could perish. But the generals, bloodied by irresistible defeats, had no choice. The unvanquished threatened the very future of their civilization. If they allowed it to roam unfettered, they felt total collapse was inevitable. That last stand had to work, or all was lost. When sensor drones confirmed the approach of this unstoppable thing, tension spiked. Stealth satellites prepped to pounce. Every turret, every great array of projections, faced toward the system's ingress. Captains on warships behind planetoids checked firing solutions. The gravitational net arrays were humming, their power surging, and it was dangerous to push them to full power. But the generals called for no half measures. The unyielding require unyielding answers. At last, the invincible sped onto the edge of the system. The trap was set. Pretending to resist as such, a handful of battered cruisers engaged, firing half-heartedly. The fallacies surged in, replying with lethal salvos that brutally obliterated the cruisers. Then, at the general's command, the gravitational net had activated at peak power. Surrounding space warped around the unstoppable. In the human warship, Alarms likely blared as the craft found itself pinned by warped fields. In unison, the Allied superweapons fired. Planetary death cannons emerging from secret outposts, clandestine assets in orbit discharging beams of starlance, missile pods filled to bursting with high-yield warheads. It all converged. Observers in obscure locations prepared for a stellar explosion. Surely, no matter how unstoppable, the monstrous must snap under such crossfire. The generals sat watching the displays, their hearts racing. This was their last, desperate gamble, their last shot at victory or mutual annihilation. Yet a twist arrived. Rather than crumple, the unstoppable channeled power into a specialized shield override. For precious seconds, the tentacles of gravity bludgeoned it, wedging the irresistible into a nearly motionless position. But the warship's sophisticated reactor drove the barrier to limits never conceived, sealing off wave after wave of devastating blasts. A few saturating beams dripped around it, incinerating Allied platforms that were not designed to withstand such colossal feedback. As the Unstoppable's armor held firm, Allied superweapons overheated or failed. The recoil blew apart the Starlance beam station. Misguided, missiles whirled uselessly. The net of particles held by gravity went taut, on the verge of meltdown. Then the Unstoppable fired off advanced EMP bursts at Gonjan net generators. And then, all at once, the net blinked and went out. Freed, the Undeterred rocketed up out of the kill zone, beaten but functional. The last gamble had gone down in spectacular failure. In that moment, the Allied generals felt their final hope collapse. What was a runaway turned its weapons against the system's primary stronghold, hulls of the gargantuan railed impactors perforating them like God's own penance. The fortress was awash in brilliant cascades, the whole kill zone an inferno of twisted metal. Their master plan, crushed. Curse of despair rippled from every faction. The Unstoppable had survived their most potent weapon, which meant Unstoppable was more than an urban legend. Any illusions of stopping Earth's champion had evaporated, replaced with mounting dread. And the Unstoppable kept moving, unstoppable again. The next stop for the Unstoppable was the center of the Empire's seat, a planetary ring once newly touted as impregnable. Here, the Empire's top generals planned centuries of conquests. Massive fortress stations populated the orbit of the planet, each surrounded by barrels of advanced cannons. Even bloodied, the Empire thought these final lines would stand. If not, then all was lost. When the Invincible was coming, the defenders opened a concentrated fire. From beam arrays to ballistic torpedoes, all of them pounded the Immortal's shield. Planet-based artillery that aligned with orbital platforms for unbroken bombardment. The Invincible faltered, weathering a punishing storm of blows. Inside the human warship, alarms may have sounded as shield reserves fell, but they held. Observers on the fortress stations caught glimpses of the Unstoppable's hull flashing between partial overloads. But it continued on, unstoppable. In an instant, those Unstoppable fired off a flurry of rail slugs. Whole orbital platforms, previously the size of asteroid colonies, tore apart in chain detonations. A few defenders attempted to organize, but the incomprehensibility's superior scanners located weaknesses at each station. Missiles pounded structural joints, taking out entire sections. In short order, the remnants of fiery wreckage floated among the ring's spokes, dwarfed by the silhouette of the Unstoppable. The planetary generals clutched a last dream. The largest fortress station, which orbited close to the equator, sported an experimental starburn cannon that was said to melt any hull. They prepared it for one unmatchable shot. The Unstoppable, sensing a big threat, went directly to that fortress. Defensive turrets flared, causing the shield of something unstoppable to shimmer dangerously. But the warship responded with precise salvos at the fortress's primary cooling towers. The starburn cannon of the fortress overheated and would not discharge. Systems jammed in a spectacular breakdown that eviscerated the station from the inside out, leaving it unable to fire as it plummeted. For with each one of those unavoidable hits, command bunkers on the ground realized that the inevitable had shattered their circle. They begged for reinforcements from hardened sectors far away, but the reinforcements never came. The Invincible hovered high up in the world's stratosphere. Advanced anti-orbital lasers made a final stand at that range. They incinerated in near-light-speed beams, exhausting the unstoppable shield. For a time, it appeared those beams could strike crippling blows. Then the unstoppable struck back with specialized counterlasers that sniped the planet's major laser installation sites, secondary detonations erupting from each scape. The invincible's shield shone, dented but whole. With no defensive ring left, the Empire's generals ordered unconditional retreat for any surviving ships. If they remained, certain doom would pursue them to the ends of the earth. The Unending, seeing them priming engines to escape, sent forth a swarm of guided warheads that blew apart their base. The final exodus never took off. The Unstoppable shadowed every escape route, sealing the Empire's doom. The last fortress station, staggering from power spikes, extracted the last of its interceptors, but even unlaunched, unstoppable rail cannons shredded their shipyards. Finally, the Ineluctable arrived at the Empire's royal citadel on the homeworld. In a crushing volley, it hit the citadel's shield generators. Battalions of high-velocity slugs tore through the power matrix. The protective field collapsed with a sparkly implosion. Released from that barrier, unimpeded rays pounded the citadel's center. Once proud alien generals looked on in wordless horror while unstoppable blasts rent through their final bastion. They prepared for the death knell, which came in a deafening blast that consumed the whole complex. Silence spread across the region. The Unstoppable paused for a moment, searching for some last threat. None remained. The last blow had broken the war machine of the Empire. Across the galaxy, alien fleets now understood indisputable power. Allies that once helped this empire turned away fast to escape an unstoppable wrath. From the planet's gravity well, the Unstoppable rose, leaving destruction behind. The war had ended, the Unstoppable sealing up the campaign with horrifying finality. Those who saw the Uncheckable take its leave were relieved and agitated. If the people of Earth had the capability and desire to destroy the galaxy's most formidable bastions, who would be able to oppose them if humanity pursued all-out expansion? The Unstoppable's performance eclipsed any possible coalition or defense. The last blow wiped out not just an empire, but the belief that humans were minor players. As the Irrepressible winked out into the stars, the bruised sector cowered in fear. In the course of days, one ship, moved by unassailable will, had vanquished eons of alien dominion. Days after the departure of the Unstoppable, the war-scarred region lay in silent ruin. Wreckage of once great alien fleets spun around broken orbital stations. The surfaces of planets were pockmarked from endless bombardments. Survivors from all sides thumbed through rubble. Days that decades of struggle went up in a moment, undone by one unstoppable human warship. Across broken worlds, the Empire's generals, once feared for their iron-fisted governance, were at the mercy of local populations they had subdued. Liberated from an oppressive rule, many of its citizens engaged in rebuilding. Some, though grateful that endless war was over, also feared what Unstoppable would do if humans demanded tribute or dominion. There was plenty of speculation. Was the Invincible an avenging champion or a herald of a wider, unstoppable fleet? Out in hidden enclaves, exiled officials conspired over forging new alliances, vowing never again to be caught flat-footed. But repeating unstoppable technology felt like a distant dream. The besieged region's war factories were destroyed and resources drained. Escaping, hoping to find edges of the galaxy that would lie beyond Earth's inexorable grasp. But no place really felt safe, with the Unstoppable's advanced scanning and warp systems. Trade routes, previously choked by conflict, unlocked in a quiet of uncertainty. Now safe from immediate danger, merchants resumed warily traversing the roads. They told of unguided beams destroying starbases. Fear rippled along supply corridors as smaller outposts adopted policies of neutrality or even preemptive surrender to Earth's will, should that will ever manifest. Meanwhile, battered governments wrestled with whether to invite Earth's envoys in to stabilize the region. In the Empire's shattered capital world, fallen citadels served as visible reminders of an unstoppable wrath. People sifted for signs of leadership in the wreckage. There was no central figure left to unify them. Some of the local powers proclaimed themselves caretaker authorities, pledging fair reconstruction. They knew what they faced if outright war broke out again. Implacable power would come back. That threat hung over every conversation, curbing old ambitions. Elsewhere, there were rumors of infiltration that couldn't be stopped. Others speculated Earth had stationed intelligence operatives among the surviving states to deter the formation of new alliances. Conspiracy theories spread, breeding paranoia. Others argued that Earth wasn't conqueror material, only deterrent. These spine waves were evidence Earth wouldn't be trifled with. The confusion in the region illustrated just how much unstoppable might had upended their worldview. In far-flung star systems impervious to the encroaching, alien systems that had once pursued expansion now retreated behind fortified gates. Fear overshadowed greed. They realized that if the unstoppable warship could shatter the war zone's mightiest empire, trifling realms would be child's play. So, a nervous quiet spread. The unstoppable warship could strike anywhere, at any time, if the Earth senses a threat. As the region sought to regroup, some survivors murmured about humanity's victory in ending endless cycles of war. In fact, they argued, the irresistible force brought peace. Others blamed humanity for the wide-scale destruction. In either case, unstoppable trumped all politics. Every leader now had a new thing to weigh before making decisions in a crisis. Will this move elicit an instant and irresistible revenge? Back on Earth, partial intelligence indicated success. The Unstoppable's mission had shattered the region's most powerful war machine. It was not clear whether any further Earth campaigns were intended. Some on Earth lobbied to pursue pacts with the newly subjugated region. Others claimed unstoppable intimidation was enough. There was no announcement of any official policy. The crew of the Unstoppable presumably returned to the home world as heroes, their warship a testament to humanity's unstoppable resolve. Whispers in the battered war zone recounted unstoppable feats. Unstoppable rail guns incinerating battleships, unstoppable beams slicing through fortress rings, unstoppable daring-do outflanking entire fleets. The word unstoppable became customary when it came to the new face of Earth's might. Liberated from oppression but timid with terror, native societies crept forward. If the irresistible warship returned, would it come back with a new order or simply absolute conquest? So ended one of the galaxy's most brutal wars, snuffed out not by diplomacy or bilateral fatigue, but rather by humanity's inexorable wrath. The last question remained. What would be Earth's next unstoppable move? As star lanes reopened, alliances were formed with hesitation and contempt, but there was one dread that overshadowed all of them. Amid the hush of the drifting debris, the galaxy echoed back the same refrain. The unstoppable might of humanity stands poised, and no empire can guarantee it will not be next.